In the golden plains of the Serengeti, within the Dreams Wildlife Sanctuary in Tanzania, nature witnessed one of its most extraordinary moments. A female leopard raising two lion cubs as if they were her own. A scene that defies everything we think we know about animal instinct and the laws of the wild. But what happened when these cubs grew up? The answer completely rewrites our understanding of animal behavior and the power of bonds formed under the most unexpected circumstances. It all began on a quiet morning when the sun was barely peeking over the acacia trees surrounding the sanctuary. Sarah Wilson's satellite phone rang unexpectedly early. Sarah, who had dedicated her life to wildlife conservation in Tanzania, had founded the sanctuary of more than 2,000 hectares, a space for rehabilitation and protection of rescued animals. The phone ringing at that hour could only mean one thing: an emergency. From the other end of the line, the urgent voice of Mbamba, a park ranger from the north, brought bad news. They had intercepted poachers trying to cross the border with lion cubs. Their mother had not survived. Sarah's heart sank. Another victim of illegal wildlife trafficking, a tragedy that still plagued the region despite all efforts to eradicate it. How many cubs? She asked, her voice already calculating space, supplies, and medical needs. 2 twins, I think, a male and a female. They're no more than 3 weeks old. They won't eat. The veterinarian says they're fading away. The veterinarian says they're fading away. 40 minutes later, Sarah was in the sanctuary clinic looking with concern at the 2 small tawny bundles in front of her. They were so small they fit in the palm of her hand. They trembled with barely open eyes, famished and frightened. The female had a distinctive dark spot around her right eye. The male was barely larger, with notably dark-tipped ears. Their whimpers were weak, like a whisper of life clinging to the world. For 3 days, Sarah and her team tried everything they knew: bottle feeding, constant warmth, intensive medical care. But the cubs rejected the milk with syringes, and the stress was so severe that the male suffered convulsions. Hours passed and their small energies faded. On the morning of the 4th day, sitting in her office and unable to concentrate on reports, Sarah felt at her limit. She had built the sanctuary with her inheritance and her passion for African fauna. But in moments like this, faced with nature's cruelty and human greed, everything seemed useless. From her window, her gaze fell on one of the outdoor enclosures where Zara rested, a female leopard rescued 2 years earlier after falling into poachers' traps. Her hind leg never fully recovered, so her release into the wild was no longer an option. Zara had adapted to the sanctuary, although she always maintained her wild instinct and a prudent distance from humans. But in recent weeks, Sarah had noticed a change. Zara had begun dragging a log around her enclosure, licking it, protecting it as if it were something more than a piece of wood. The veterinarian confirmed it. Zara was going through a false pregnancy, a condition not uncommon in large cats in captivity that could induce maternal behaviors despite there being no real offspring. As she watched her delicately arrange her log, a bold and until then unthinkable idea began to take shape in Sarah's mind. In nature, rare cases of adoption between species had occurred, normally between related animals, but lions and leopards were natural enemies. In the wild, leopards frequently lost prey to lions and were even killed by them. An adult leopard would normally see lion cubs as a threat, not as an opportunity for motherhood. However, the cubs would die if no intervention was made somehow. Conventional methods had failed. What was there to lose? Sarah decided to try. She spent the next hour preparing a safe room, a neutral space next to the quarantine area where the cubs were. Everything had to be carefully planned. The slightest error could be fatal. Sarah installed several cameras in the small room prepared for the encounter. Every angle had to be covered. She also positioned her emergency response team in case something went wrong. Her heart beat strongly as she very carefully lifted the small female lion cub, wrapping her in a soft blanket. Sarah, the leopard, was the first to be brought to the neutral enclosure. She walked cautiously, clearly uncomfortable in that unknown space. Her tail moved nervously. When Sarah entered with the cub in her arms, Zara's body tensed immediately. She remained completely motionless, her eyes fixed on the small figure wrapped in fabric. Sarah held her breath. She was ready to retreat at the slightest sign of aggression. Zara dilated her nostrils, detecting the scent of the lion cub. Her ears flattened against her head, an ambiguous gesture that could be warning, doubt, or simple surprise. The small lion emitted soft whimpers of distress, motionless in Sarah's hands. After an eternal instant, the tension in Zara's body began to give way. She took measured steps with her tail low, but without aggression. She slowly approached Sarah, stretching her neck, her whiskers trembling as she sniffed the cub. The cub, too weak to move, offered no resistance, and then the unexpected happened. Zara let out a soft snort, the same sound that leopard mothers emit to their own cubs, and began licking her head with her rough tongue, cleaning her tenderly. The cub, far from shrinking as she did with humans, remained still. After a few minutes of this delicate interaction, Sarah carefully placed the cub on a blanket on the floor. Zara, without hesitation, curled up around her, continuing with the grooming as if she were hers. The change was immediate. That cub who had rejected all human contact now sought warmth and comfort in the spotted body of the leopard. Sarah withdrew slowly, without stopping looking at the unusual pair. Minutes later, she returned with the male cub. Against all odds, the miracle repeated. Zara also accepted him, curling both little ones in her fur as if they had always been hers. That night, Sarah stayed in the observation room next to the monitors. What she witnessed seemed impossible even for the most experienced animal behaviorists. A female leopard tenderly caring for two lion cubs, and the little ones nursing from her as if she were their real mother. In the morning, the female cub, whom Sarah had called Leona for her markedly lean appearance, accepted a little bottle milk for the first time. Leo, as the male had been named, also began to feed. On the screens, Sarah observed how Zara protected them carefully, licking them, caring for them, coming instantly when they emitted any sound. A week later, the transformation was evident. Leo and Leona had gained weight and were beginning to explore the environment with the curiosity typical of any cub. Zara didn't lose sight of them. If either wandered too far, she would gently take them by the neck to bring them back. She also positioned herself between them and any person who came too close. She was undoubtedly their mother. Sarah documented every moment. Photos, videos, detailed notes about their development. She knew she was witnessing something extraordinary, an adoption between species that defied everything science had recorded up to that moment, and she also intuited its potential value for future wildlife rehabilitation techniques. When the cubs turned 1 month old, they began eating ground meat. However, each night they slept curled against Zara's warm body. Their play became more active, typical of felines. They stalked, pounced, climbed. Zara watched everything with infinite patience. Sometimes she joined their games, but above all acted as their safe refuge when they were tired or scared. Sarah watched them from the observation room, a slight smile drawing on her lips. Perhaps, she thought, the most natural thing in nature is not what we expect, but the capacity to adapt, to form new bonds, and overcome the apparently impossible. Zara, Leo, and Leona were rewriting the rules, and Sarah knew the story was just beginning. However, she couldn't help wondering what would happen when those adorable cubs became the powerful lions that genetics dictated. Could that bond survive the awakening of their true instincts? Only time would tell, but for now they had a chance, and that was already a miracle. Time passed quickly at the Dream Sanctuary in the Serengeti. Leo and Leona were no longer those tiny and fragile creatures that once fit in the palm of a hand. At just over 6 months, they had become robust young lions, their golden bodies shining under the African sun, muscles beginning to outline under their skin. Sarah, anticipating their growth, had expanded the family enclosure to a space of more than 1 hectare. She had designed it to resemble their natural habitat, with tall savanna grass, eroded rocks, and scattered acacia trees. Every detail was a carefully constructed version of the world to which they might someday belong. Every morning, Sarah spent hours observing them through the camera system. What she saw completely defied scientific knowledge about the behavior of big cats. Zara not only continued caring for Leo and Leona, she was also teaching them to be what they were, not what she was. She didn't try to turn them into leopards, but adapted to their instincts, finding ways to raise lions, even though she herself wasn't one. Zara spoke about it with amazement even after months. Zara encourages them to stalk through the grass instead of climbing trees as she would with her own offspring. She teaches them to coordinate during hunting, something completely contrary to her solitary nature. Leo and Leona learn to act as a team, to move like a pack. Each morning began with a familiar ritual. Zara would wake her children with gentle licks on the face and guide them toward the food Sarah left prepared for them. Unlike the wild world, where lions and leopards are natural enemies, Zara showed almost impossible behavior. She let the cubs eat first. It was a gesture of maternal sacrifice that not even many lionesses adopt in their natural state. After breakfast came the lessons. Zara taught them to read the wind, to move without making noise, and above all, to be patient. The golden virtue of leopards, so scarce in wild lions. Sarah placed fictional prey in the enclosure, and Zara guided them in hunting simulations. Sometimes they spent hours motionless, waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. And after each learning session came playtime. Leo and Leona rolled through the grass, fought among themselves, and often managed to get Zara to join their games. She endured it with infinite patience, letting herself be defeated again and again, teaching them through those small battles what it meant to measure strength, calculate movements, win and lose. But as the months passed, uneasiness began to haunt Sarah. As they approached 9 months, Leo and Leona almost equaled Zara in size. Soon they would surpass her, not only in height but in strength. Scientists and experts from around the world who followed the case began warning her about the inevitable. "It's a fascinating experiment, no doubt," wrote a German biologist, "but nature will prevail. When the lions reach sexual maturity, their instincts will overcome any bond forged in infancy. Prepare for separation." It is apenas dos instincts is prepare separation. Sarah, although clinging to hope, couldn't help wondering the same thing. What would happen when the balance of power was reversed? Would they continue recognizing Zara as mother when their territorial and hunting instincts fully developed? The answer came in the most unexpected way. On a hot and oppressive afternoon, when Leo and Leona were close to turning 1-year-old, the sanctuary's security system sent an urgent alert. A section of the fence had been damaged by a fallen tree after the previous night's rains, but that wasn't the worst. A wild male leopard had managed to enter Zara's enclosure. Sarah ran to the surveillance screens with her heart in her throat. There, in the images, Zara rested peacefully in the shade, unaware that an intruder was stalking through the grass. Leo and Leona played not far away, equally oblivious to the imminent danger. The male leopard, larger and more muscular than Zara, advanced stealthily, his gaze fixed on her. For leopards, territory is everything, and that male clearly saw her as an invader. In nature, such an encounter has only 2 possible endings: death or serious injuries. Sarah hastily gathered her intervention team, but she knew they wouldn't arrive in time. She could only watch helplessly. The male leopard approached step by step, hidden by the undergrowth. Zara still didn't perceive the threat, and then, when the intruder prepared to launch himself at her, something happened. A golden shadow crossed the screen like lightning. It was Leo. The young lion had realized the intruder's presence and reacted with a speed and strength Sarah had never seen in him. Instead of fleeing or hiding, as any young lion would do before an adult of another species, Leo positioned himself between Zara and the attacker. His body collided with the leopard's in mid-leap, deflecting the attack. The roar that came from his throat wasn't that of a defenseless cub. It was the powerful, threatening roar of an almost adult young male. A roar that resonated throughout the sanctuary. He wasn't just defending his territory, but the mother who had raised him. The mother who didn't share his species, but did share his heart. Zara jumped, startled both by the attack and by Leo's sudden appearance. The male leopard, surprised to find himself facing a lion instead of a defenseless female, hesitated for an instant. That brief moment of hesitation was enough for Leona, alerted by her brother's roar, to run to his side. Now, the leopard didn't face easy prey, but two young lions, both larger and stronger than him, defending Zara with a ferocity that defied any logical explanation. Zara watched without blinking, holding her breath, but what happened next wasn't the explosion of violence everyone would have expected. Instead of attacking, the male leopard slowly retreated. His survival instinct overcame his territorial desire. With a final growl, he turned around and disappeared into the tall grass, returning through the hole in the fence. However, what most impacted Sarah wasn't that Leo and Leona had driven away the intruder, but what happened afterward. When the danger had passed, the two lions showed neither aggression nor dominance towards Zara. There were no signs of the hierarchy change that so many experts had warned about. Instead, both approached her tenderly, licking her face and rubbing their heads against hers. It was a clear, unequivocal gesture of affection. Zara wasn't for them a rival or a victim, but their family. They seemed to see her as their mother, whispered Sarah, her voice still trembling with emotion, not as a threat or as a different species, but as their mother, as part of their pack. That moment marked a before and after. In the weeks that followed, Sarah noticed a profound change in the dynamics between Zara and the lions. Although the leopard continued acting as caregiver, Leo and Leona began to protect her, to patrol their shared territory, and to growl even at caregivers who came too close. Sarah and her team, who before could enter with relative ease, were now watched with attentive and protective eyes. Many specialists insisted that this was only a passing stage. "It's a transition," wrote a renowned biologist. "When they mature completely, their natural instincts will prevail. Don't get carried away by feelings." But Sarah wasn't convinced. She had spent her entire life among animals, and what she saw with Zara, Leo, and Leona couldn't be explained only with instinct or necessity. There was something more, a bond that transcended biology, an authentic connection. A month later, with Leo already converted into an imposing young lion of more than 150 kilograms, and Leona agile and strong in her own way, everyone agreed that the time had come to make a difficult decision. In nature, that would be the point where cubs would separate from their mother. Sarah's colleagues insisted they should move the lions to a new space, away from Zara. The sanctuary's chief zoologist was categorical. "We've never seen anything like this, but we can't take risks. If their instincts merge, Zara wouldn't have a chance." Sarah understood the risks and didn't ignore them. It was true. There was no precedent, no documented case of an adult leopard living peacefully with two adult lions. There was no manual, no study, no simulation that could anticipate what would come. But her intuition told her something different. She had seen how the three continued interacting with affection and trust. Leo and Leona continued seeking Zara to play, to hunt, to learn. She continued guiding them, and they continued protecting her. Separating them, Sarah intuited, would not only break that bond, but would traumatize them all. It was a difficult decision, but in the end, Sarah bet on what her eyes and heart told her. She kept the three together under close surveillance and with a contingency plan prepared. "I know it goes against all the advice I've received," she wrote in her diary, "but sometimes you have to trust more in what we see than in what we think we know, because what I had seen had no name. A family formed not by species but by bond, by coexistence, by choice." And that decision would mark a new turning point, not only for Zara, Leo, and Leona, but for everything we thought we knew about wildlife. As they matured, the lions didn't distance themselves from Zara. On the contrary, they continued seeing her as mother, as guide, as an essential part of their life. And now they were also her protectors. There, in that improbable family, nature and nurture intersected. Innate instincts were rewritten by experience, by love, by shared history. The story of Zara, Leo, and Leona began to attract the world's attention. Scientists, conservationists, and the general public were fascinated with what was happening. If a leopard and two lions could overcome millions of years of biological programming to form a family, what else might be possible? Sarah asked herself this every time she saw them rest together under the trees, heads intertwined, differences dissolved in affection. Because perhaps she thought the boundaries between species aren't as firm as we believe. Perhaps in the end, what defines a family isn't instinct but choice. They slept together, curled up in a corner of the sanctuary, three creatures of different species united by bonds no one would have imagined possible. A lion, a lioness, and a female leopard. That image said it all, that even in a world governed by instincts and natural rivalries, there existed a possibility to overcome barriers that seemed insurmountable. But that singular relationship would soon face challenges no one could foresee. As the story spread, a leopard raising two lions as if they were her own children, the phenomenon attracted the world's attention. With it came threats both from nature and from human beings. The question that resonated among scientists, conservationists, and observers was inevitable. When Leo and Leona reached their complete maturity, would they continue seeing Zara as their mother? Or would the ancient bonds be eclipsed by wild impulses and genetic limits? The sanctuary, previously tranquil, began to fill with visitors, cameras, and journalists. The security gates vibrated with the constant clicks of photographers, all trying to capture a historic image, an adult leopard resting peacefully between two fully developed lions. It was a scene that defied everything known, an image that became a symbol of the extraordinary. 2 years had passed since the day Sarah Wilson, against all odds, entrusted a sick leopard with the lives of two orphaned lion cubs. Now Leo was a majestic adult male with a dark and thick mane, more than 2 meters long and weighing over 200 kilograms. Leona, although smaller, was powerful, agile, and determined. Beside them, Zara seemed tiny. But what was amazing wasn't the physical contrast, but the bond that persisted among the three. There's nothing in nature that explains this as we're seeing it, Sarah explained to a team of documentarians. They've created a new language among themselves. It's neither lion nor leopard, it's theirs, it's unique. Scientists began studying them rigorously. Renowned ethologists and zoologists traveled from different continents to observe what was no longer just a rarity. It was a revolution in the study of animal behavior. They documented how Leo and Leona adjusted their behavior when with Zara, moderating their strength when playing with her, communicating with a mixture of soft growls, snorts, and calls that didn't completely belong to either of their species. Even their way of hunting had evolved. They used an impossible combination in nature: the silent patience of the leopard and the team coordination of the lion. It was a hybrid style, a strategy that seemed more learned than instinctive. They called it family culture, not genetic, not programmed, but constructed. A scientific article described it thus: "This case opens a profound reflection on the plasticity of animal behavior and questions the limits of what we consider fixed by biology. It's a story that forces us to look at nature with different eyes." When Leo and Leona reached the fullness of their maturity, the experts' darkest predictions never came true. There was no aggression towards Zara, no distance or rejection. On the contrary, the bond deepened. They continued being a family, and Zara, incredibly, continued being their central figure, their adoptive mother, the emotional guide of the two most powerful predators in the sanctuary. However, the success of this story also unleashed controversy. Some conservationists accused Sarah of having intervened too much in natural processes. Others feared that the fame of the three animals could generate false expectations about the possibility of replicating these relationships in other wildlife contexts. "This isn't a model, it's a special case," Sarah insisted in every interview. "It's not about idealizing interspecies coexistence. This relationship was the result of extreme and unique circumstances. It shouldn't be forced or expected to occur in other places." But global interest only continued to grow. The sanctuary began to prosper, driven by thousands of visitors who lined up for hours just to see the impossible family. New sponsors offered their support, allowing Sarah to expand her conservation and rehabilitation work. With fame also came new threats. Sarah and her team discovered clear evidence that groups of poachers were planning to enter the sanctuary. The objective was obvious: capture or kill the three animals who were now famous worldwide. Their rarity and symbolic value had made them coveted targets for illegal wildlife trafficking and unscrupulous collectors. What had begun as a desperate act of compassion had transformed into a story that captivated and divided the world. A family composed of predators united not by blood but by choice, by transformed instinct, by affection. And although threats grew, so did Sarah's determination, not only to protect them but to continue learning from them. Because in that corner of the Serengeti, three lives had defied centuries of instinct and had demonstrated that even in the wildest nature, love could rewrite the rules. Sarah had to take urgent measures, faced with the growing interest in the sanctuary and external threats. She increased security, hired additional personnel to patrol the area, and even built a sophisticated electric fence around the zone where Leo, Leona, and Zara lived. However, the greatest challenge didn't come from outside, but from a natural and inevitable change. When Leo turned 3 years old, his body began to experience the transformations typical of adulthood. Reproductive hormones began circulating strongly, awakening new and powerful impulses. Until then, Leo had been calm and affectionate, but he began showing restlessness, walking along the perimeter of his territory, growling, sometimes even rejecting food. Leona also changed, although more subtly. It was evident both were maturing. Sarah knew this was the moment many had predicted as the end of this extraordinary family. This could be the breaking point, she confessed to her closest colleague. The assumption was clear: reproductive instincts would end up breaking the bonds formed in infancy. Aware that Leo and Leona's emotional stability was at stake, Sarah devised a bold solution. She began introducing them in a very controlled way to neighboring zones of the sanctuary where other lions lived. The interactions were brief and supervised, but allowed the two young ones to come into contact with members of their own species. The result exceeded all expectations. Leo was able to relate to other males, express his territorial impulses, and release accumulated tensions. Leona, for her part, became friends with two young lionesses and began learning aspects of social behavior typical of her species, things that Zara, as a leopard, couldn't teach her. However, each night both returned to Zara, seeking the same warmth, security, and closeness as always. They're developing a double identity, Sarah explained in an interview. They are lions, yes, but also members of a unique family, formed by choice and not by genetics. It was a statement that completely challenged what was believed to be known about animal identity and behavior. To celebrate Leo and Leona's 4th birthday, 3 years after being entrusted to Zara, Sarah organized a special event. Scientists, conservationists, and followers from around the world gathered at the sanctuary to witness what was already considered one of the most notable animal behavior experiments ever recorded. From a specially conditioned observation area, visitors could see how the three creatures interacted, played, hunted, and communicated as a fluid unit. In a particularly emotional moment, Zara led a hunting demonstration alongside Leo and Leona. She stayed high up, observing and directing, while the two lions precisely executed the attack on fictional prey. Upon concluding, they shared the symbolic spoils. Zara ate first, a gesture that defied the typical hierarchies of lions and leopards, where the female, and much less one of another species, rarely leads. It was an act charged with meaning. What we're seeing here, Sarah told the crowd, isn't a simple rarity. It's evidence of an incredible flexibility of the animal mind. It's proof that instinct doesn't always dictate destiny. By the year 2022, this unusual family remained united. Leo and Leona, now 6 years old, were full-fledged adult lions. Zara, at 10 years old, still remained healthy and active. Together, they defied not only the logic of biology, but also centuries of assumptions about the nature of animal behavior. Sarah summarized it in her memoirs with a profound reflection. This story raises essential questions about what is truly genetic and what is learned, about the power of emotion versus instinct, about how we define the natural. To those who still maintain that this relationship was temporary or even unnatural, Sarah responded with a smile. Come see. Come look into the eyes of Zara, Leo, and Leona. Three creatures who, according to all known laws, should be enemies, and tell me if you don't see something greater, more powerful than instinct. When love encounters instinct, Sarah would say, one might be surprised which ends up prevailing. And observing them together in perfect harmony, it becomes clear that adaptability and love have the capacity to overcome even the barriers that nature itself has erected. Isn't that perhaps a message of hope for all of us?